Millions of people have made this one mistake when reading their Bibles, and doing so has led to heartbreak, disappointment, and even walking away from the faith entirely. If you are making this mistake, then you need to stop immediately, otherwise your faith may be on a foundation of sand. And not only is this a mistake that can be made in our interpretation of the Bible, it is a mistake that can be made in relationships. I want you to imagine that you are a college student who has an intense crush on a girl in your class, and every time you want to ask her out, you chicken out at the last moment. And so now you're there just researching all of the greatest pickup lines, definitely not cheesy ones, in order to finally ask her out and go on this amazing date with her. When suddenly you receive a letter in the mail from your crush. You open it up and read, "I don't know how to tell you this, but I have been having feelings for you over the past few weeks. Let's talk after class." So all excited, you throw the letter across the room, you're jumping up and down, and the next day, immediately after class, you go and ask her out only for her to say, "I'm sorry, I just don't have feelings for you like that. Can we just be friends?" Now, if you were in this situation, how exactly would you feel? Hurt? Betrayed? After all, she sent you a letter telling you that she had feelings for you, only to then reject you to your face. So I want you to imagine that you go back to your room, you pick up the letter, and you're about to rip it to shreds. You're just furious. And then you give yourself a massive facepalm because it turns out the letter was not actually addressed to you. It was addressed to your roommate, Dave. So it turns out she wasn't leading you on at all. It just turns out you forgot to read who the letter was addressed to. And much like this example, every single one of the 66 books of the Bible may be considered a letter from God. Yet none of them were written to you. Contrary to popular belief, the Bible is not God's love letter to you. Genesis was not written to you. It was written to the nation of Israel. Matthew was not written to you. It was written to Jewish Christians. Romans was not written to you. It was written to the Romans. Look, it even says it in the title. And much like the example of reading a letter from our crush, if we assume the Bible is written to us, it will cause us to read ourselves into the text where we do not belong. This can lead to misunderstanding God's promises and even believing that God has failed in promises that he never made in the first place. Now, you might be writing a very angry rant about, yes, the Bible does apply to us. We have plenty to learn from the Bible. How can you say it has nothing to do with us? Well, slow down. That's not what I'm saying. The Bible certainly applies to us. I would not dream of saying anything other than that. All I am saying is, if we are truly to understand how to apply the Bible to our lives correctly, then we need to understand it first. In order to apply it to ourselves, we must understand to whom it was originally written and how they would have understood the text. And it can also be the case that a particular section of scripture applies to all Christians. So if you are a Christian, then it applies to you. But it is still not written to you. It was written to an original audience, and it is expected that they would understand it. So if we are going to understand it, we need to understand what they would think. So the procedure then is clear. First, we need to understand to whom a text is written. Second, we need to understand about whom does the text apply. And then third, we need to apply it to ourselves, understanding it correctly. So let's jump into an example to show how all this works. Joshua 1:9 says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." To whom was this originally said? Well, it was originally spoken by God to Joshua as he went into Canaan to conquer the whole region of the Levant. Now, to whom does it apply? Well, the text applies clearly to Joshua himself. It also applies to all the people who are following Joshua in this conquest of Canaan, but there is absolutely nothing at all to assume that this is referring to Christians. Therefore, God is not promising to you in this passage that he is going to be with you wherever you go. He is also not commanding you to go and conquer Canaan, so we shouldn't really apply this text to us as Christians. Yes, it is true that if you are a Christian, God promises to always be with you. However, that is not what this text is about. Now, this doesn't mean it has nothing to say. We can gather things like, Just as Joshua was commanded to do something and therefore he did it, we should be willing to do whatever God commands us to do. Similarly, if God commands you to go and accomplish something, he will provide the means to accomplish it. These are correct applications from the text because they are not reading us into a text where we do not belong. When we correctly understand the text, then we can derive the right application to us. Otherwise, our understanding of God is built on a foundation of sand. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. To whom was this text originally said? Well, it was spoken to exiles who had just been taken away from their homeland after the vast majority of their countrymen had been slaughtered. And this is because of their continuing disobedience throughout generations. These individuals have been punished by God, and therefore they are being taken into exile. Yet God is promising that he will deliver them from exile and that he will continue them throughout all time. And so their descendants will never end, just as he promised Abraham. Now, about whom does this text apply? Well, clearly it applies to the exiles, although it might not necessarily apply to every single exile, because not every single individual is going to actually return from Babylon, but it applies to the nation as a whole. Now, does it apply to Christians? The question of how it applies to us is actually extremely difficult, because it depends on whether or not you believe the promises made to the nation of Israel apply to Christians. The two camps in this debate are usually dispensationalism and replacement theology on the other hand. These two camps often get into very heated discussions on this and go into a wide variety of texts to defend their points. So this is much beyond the scope of this video, but the point is, if you have a pastor who just quotes this verse out of context, doesn't tell you about the exile, doesn't tell you about replacement theology or how to understand these things, then they are not doing justice to the text, and they are absolutely destroying the text of Jeremiah 9:11. And speaking of highly misinterpreted passages, check out this video on how most Christians completely misunderstand the whole point of being citizens of heaven.